He is the Vampire Lestat. He's immortal. Kind of. He has the blood of Akasha in him, and apparently, he also has already a male inside of him. Well guys, this is it. Savage Garden Talks is one last time here to talk about the Vampire Lestat episode 7, Failures, which is the finale of the season. I can't believe it went so quickly. Like, we waited so long for this season and now it's over and now we have to wait again for the next one. But yeah, let's dive into this episode, which was insanely crazy and amazing. My rating for this episode is 3.5 stars. It's an amazing episode, don't get me wrong, and it does bring a good closure to that storyline of accepting his true identity, his true self, of accepting his own failures. But first, it doesn't really work as the ending of this adaptation, because the ending of the Vampire Lestat is such an amazing cliffhanger, and I was expecting more of that. And it also is an ending that leaves you with more questions than answers. And I know this is just part 1 of the story. We're surely going to get season 4 and we're going to have the complete story. But you need to give a good closure that leaves a little bit of questions, but that you feel satisfied and you feel that you understand everything properly. And I don't think this episode did that, because there are so many plot points that weren't technically closed, like Armand and Daniel, what happened to them, what happened with baby Jenks. The concert apparently happened, but we didn't see any of it. So I have so many questions about so many things, and it irritates me that we need to wait 2 more years for another season, for more answers. And yeah, it was not great. Adding more to that, this season was not a good adaptation. Interview with the Vampire seasons 1 and 2 were, to me at least, a pretty good adaptation of the book they were inspired on. But the Vampire Lestat, no, it simply isn't. It was too much different from what we were promised. I'm going to start with Louis, Armand, Regina, and Farid. First off, Regina. What a big plot twist. I didn't see that coming at all. I was never expecting that Regina was actually working for Armand. I think this plot twist was bigger than the Armand reveal in season 1. Like, I don't think any of us imagined this was going to happen. I hope she's fine. I don't know if Regina will be back in future seasons, because again, she doesn't really have a closure. She just leaves and that's it. But I'm interested to see if she has a future in this universe. Now, regarding Farid, I love to finally see him doing something regarding vampires. Because in the books, Farid is a doctor for vampires. He literally just studies vampires, and he's a vampire himself. I don't know if Farid is a vampire here. We don't see his eyes or his nails, but we didn't see those elements in Rashid in season 1 either, so I don't know. But I love finally seeing Farid working on vampire science. And I need Seth to be with him. I just love Seth and Farid as a pair in the books. Now, we finally got a Luman reunion, and it was horrific indeed. First off, and I want everyone to know my posture on this, Louis didn't owe shit to Armand. Is Louis a good person? No. Nobody in this show is a good person. They all have questionable moralities. But Louis was 100% a victim of Armand. Yes, both Louis and Armand forced themselves into this relationship. They could have left each other at any moment, but okay, they didn't. And it was interesting to explore how Louis's past role as a pimp was involved into his dynamic with Armand, because Louis did use Armand in this relationship. He was using Armand to basically rage bait Lestat. And it was also interesting to explore how Louis was actually aware how Armand was a victim of the very business Louis held when he was a mortal man. But Louis acted this way with Armand as an answer, as a response to Armand's own actions. Besides, Louis is also in a relationship based on a lie that Armand perpetrated, because Louis thought Armand actually saved him at the trial. I mean, Louis knew Armand was involved in the death of Gloria, but he thought Armand saved his life. And then 77 years later, he finds out that that was not like that. Armand did not attempt to save Louis' life. It was Lestat who did that. And besides that, he also discovers that Armand had altered in some ways his memories. So the consensual part of Louis in this relationship is not as clear as Louis thought. So in this context, Armand cannot be seen as a victim in any way. And that's why I firmly believe that Louis did not owe Armand an apology. That being said, this is a gothic horror / romance show and story. And even though gothic horror is not inherently the romanticization of abuse, it does blur the lines between fear and passion and love and horror. So even though Louis absolutely didn't owe anything to Armand, Armand as a character believes that Louis owes something to him. And that's why Armand forced an apology out of Louis. We also need to question how sincere was his apology, because Louis was forced to it. He needed to apologize to save Regina's life and his own life. And I think he started like as a coercion. He was coerced into it. He started to talk because he needed just to get out of that situation. But as he talked, he went to a place he always kept inside himself and never shared with Armand. And this had some sort of closure for both of them. And this somehow reminds me of the way Louis and Armand part ways in Interview with a Vampire, the book. Because Armand spent a lot of years with Louis as well. But he was trying to get some emotion out of Louis. In the books, Louis was simply like a carcass, like a robot, emotionless. And Armand actually wanted Louis to at least tell him that he hated him or something. What I find similar in this situation is that Louis finally tells Armand the truth. He used him. He didn't love him. Armand needed something better than him, which was basically what Louis told Armand in the books. I know what you did to Gloria. I'm never going to be something real to you. I'm just with you because I don't care about anything anymore. And so that the ways they separate are similar in thematic. Like Armand finally accepts that Louis will never love him the way he wants to, and finally accepts to leave and close that chapter with Louis for good. Then Armand marks his initial on Louis as a way to show, his power. But I also think it's significant to notice where that mark is done, because it's done on Louis' chest, on top of his heart. And I think besides being like a mark of power, it also is some sort of mark of love. Like Armand accepts that he and Louis are never going to work. They never really did work. And so he just I'm going to leave you, but I will always be on you. My impact in your life will always be there. And I think that was some sort of way to show some fucked up affection to Louis before leaving for good. From these scenes, I also liked the way they mixed horror with comedy, because the Armand line and the part where Armand pokes Louis's body with the machete and Louis is just trying to, get Armand far away from him were absolutely hilarious. And I also wonder what was the purpose with Lestat's body, because we already know what Armand wanted to do with Louis, but were Armand and Daniel planning to kill Lestat? I don't think Daniel could probably have wanted to kill Lestat, but I don't think Armand would have wanted that. But they completely separated Lestat's body and head, and there wasn't no explanation for it. So what was the purpose here? And this is what I mean that this finale left us with more questions than answers. Let's move on now to the long table stuff, because this was the epitome of the journey that Lestat went throughout the whole season. The long table and the exploration of Lestat's psyche through his fledglings and makers, and the ways he wronged them and the ways they wronged Lestat, was an absolutely great essay and analysis of Lestat as a character. Because Lestat is a character with a lot of bravado, and he usually likes to put up a facade. So people would think he's some sort of god and he's like, doing fine and that there's nothing wrong in his life. But when we are inside his thoughts, we see how everything is just collapsing. And this was a very clever way to arrive to the book Lestat we all love and adore. Because I've always felt this version of Lestat in the show is a lot more cruel and cold and detached from humanity than his book version. Because in here Lestat is mean to humans overall. He has said many times that he doesn't care about humanity. But in the books, and here, Lestat does care about humanity as much as Louis does. The thing is that he just embraces his monstrosity more. He accepts his monstrosity more naturally than Louis does. But Lestat loves humanity, and I like how they used this whole journey to actually arrive at that place where you can see that Lestat regrets all the death he has brought to this world, how he actually regrets being such a monster, how he actually cares for humanity and for all the lives he has met throughout his existence. The way that Gabriella and Magnus were used was also pretty clever, because at this point, Lestat had already acknowledged that Magnus was his abuser, that Magnus turned him without his consent, and Magnus was this big monster in his life. But he was still, denying the big and hurtful role Gabriella had in his life. And by putting Gabriella as his first maker on the chair, he actually and finally realizes how her influence, how her abuse has shaped him, and how much hurt he is because of it. I think he was aware of it before, but he didn't accept it. And thanks to this journey he went through, he finally was able to, embrace that monstrosity and to accept that his mother/lover is not this actual goddess he thought she was. It was also pretty great to see Louis and Nikki interacting, even though they're not really Louis and Nikki, but I never imagined seeing Louis and Nikki sitting next to each other. That was a pretty cool detail. I do wonder, why did Marius arrive at the long table? Because in the books, Marius is a big role in Lestat's life. Like, Marius was this mentor Lestat never had before in his vampiric life. Marius was very loving to Lestat. He also threatened Lestat, and Lestat didn't share knowledge to Louis and Claudia because of that threat that Marius put on him. So Marius had this big and huge presence on his life and actions. But in this show, Marius doesn't really do anything for Lestat. Like, he just tells him, hey, you're now the new keeper. He goes, and then he arrives to, like, you're not worthy of this, please get out of here. Like, he doesn't really interact with Lestat, and he doesn't really create a bond with him. So I'm not sure why Marius was there. Yes, he was like taking Akasha's role, but Lestat bonded a lot more with Akasha than he did with Marius. Lestat spent 10 years with Akasha, and Akasha talked to him telepathically. So I think I would have preferred to see a version of Akasha here instead of Marius, because Marius did not make sense to me. That being said, I did like seeing Marius, because in here Marius seemed more in character regarding the books as to how he looked in the past of Lestat's memories. So I'm conflicted. Like, Marius did not make sense there, but I also love seeing Marius there. And it's funny because Marius sits on the only empty chair which was destined to Claudia, but of course Claudia was not at the long table, because what else was there to say? Lestat had already allowed Claudia to hate him. Lestat already knew how much he failed Claudia. So I'm okay with the fact that Claudia was not there, but Marius just arrives out of nowhere and sits in that chair like, okay, let's continue, I guess. The witch's place was weird, amazing, and painful. Weird because I don't think there were witch burnings in the late 18th century of France. That doesn't make much sense to me. Amazing and painful because of the parallels between that scene and Lestat making Claudia watch Charlie's body being burned. In the books, Lestat doesn't actually witness a witch burning. He goes to a place where witches used to be burned years ago, because again, there were no witch burnings in the late 18th century of France. And so when Lestat goes to this place as a child, and he gets to tell the story of what happened there, he has a breakdown because he, of course, finds this absolutely horrific, and he cannot believe that humans were capable of doing such an atrocious act. And they had to look for Gabrielle because they couldn't calm Lestat down. And when Gabrielle finds out that they told the horrific truth to Lestat, she's actually angry because she didn't want her little boy to find such an horrific truth at such a young age. But with everything that changed from Gabrielle for Gabriella in the show, and the way she has been abusing Lestat even before vampirism, it makes sense for them to make this whole scene for the show. Because Gabriella wanted Lestat to get out of there. But Lestat was too attached to her because she was the only person in his human life that showed him any kind of affection. So he probably was afraid that if he left, he wouldn't find that anywhere else. So it's pretty painful to see how Gabriella made Lestat watch that. Not only that burning, but the twins were kids that were Lestat's friends. And that parallels so much with how people and vampires tend to repeat patterns without even realizing, because I don't know if Lestat was completely aware of that. What he did to Claudia and Charlie was pretty similar to what Gabriella did to him as a child. And I think he was actually realizing about how similar those two events were and how he repeated something his mother did with him. Another great element of this long table psyche limbo journey was the timer, because it represented the time Lestat had left to live, and it also displayed his will to live despite the horrors he has gone through. Because the first time the alarm went off and Lestat was about to die, Lestat had literally just saw his whole life through his eyes and how much he failed in it. But then he snoozed the alarm because he was not ready to just die like that. He needed to say something. And this is what I meant about Lestat's optimism in the books that I really didn't see before this episode, because before I saw Lestat like moping all the time and like focused on all the failures he made, but in here I actually finally see Lestat's own optimism and lightness. This is actually something very important for Lestat and Nicola's relationship, because Nicky was a very pessimistic person and he saw darkness everywhere, and so Lestat was like that brightness Nicky needed in his life because he wasn't able to produce it by his own. And so Lestat snoozed the alarm, stands on the table facing all of his victims, all of his loved ones, all of the people he has grown and loved in his life, which by the way I think Armand should have been there, but okay. And he acknowledges that yes, he has failed multiple times, but he has always attempted something. He has never been a man to just stay and do nothing. He has always been a man of action, a man that keeps trying no matter how much he keeps failing. And this is the Lestat I love, a Lestat that is responsible and accountable for the action he has made, a Lestat that despite everything continues to shine and continues to see life as an opportunity to live new experiences every day. So even though at the end it was a bit dim because, well, Lestat was actually dying, this was an amazing journey to finally see that aspect of Lestat that was really missing in this story. His optimism, his brightness, his will to move on despite everything. And in here, his love for humanity also shines, because I never liked the way Lestat treated Larry. It felt so out of character to me. But after seeing the whole season, I can understand. Like Lestat told Larry, your guitar represents my frailty. So Lestat was pretty mean to Larry because he could see a lot of himself in Larry. He could see how Larry was not perfect and he wanted to be, but he was far away from being that. And so Lestat saw himself in Larry, and maybe he despised Larry because of that. And then in here we see all of the people Lestat loved, Lestat wronged, traumatized or killed, and we can see that Lestat actually cares for them, that Lestat actually has affection for all the lives he has taken. And this is the Lestat that I love. This is the Lestat that is monstrous, but is also loving and regrets all of the horrific things he has done in life. And now, my favorite part of the episode, Paul. I don't know if this Paul was meant to be like a reflection of Lestat's own psyche, like the rest of the characters we see here, or if he was actually some sort of spirit that was ready to take Lestat to the afterlife. But either way, using Paul as a way of Louis telling Lestat that he loves him was perfect. Because the first time we hear Louis saying those words to Lestat, they need to come from the real Louis, not from a hallucination Louis, not from a psyche Louis. The first time we hear Louis saying, I love you to Lestat, we need to actually see Jacob Anderson as Louis saying it. So I love the way they used Paul to talk through Louis in Lestat's mind. Of course Lestat knows Louis loves him, but he never really hears it from Louis. So having Paul talk as Louis or through Louis in Lestat's own mind was perfect, because Paul was the last person Louis said I love you before Louis became a vampire. So Paul represents that love that Louis has always denied to Lestat. And in here Lestat is accepting that, yeah, he failed. He failed uncountable times, but he also loved, and he also has and had people that had loved him as well. So Paul was pretty perfect, and I also loved how he told us that.
I still wish you were a woman.
Me too, sometimes.
I love that we actually got some explicit gender identity stuff in this show, because Lestat has been pretty gender fluid with his presentation, but we never get to hear anything from him, or of course from Gabriela, because Gabriela doesn't have anything from that part of the book. But having Lestat saying that is perfect, because these vampires are beyond all genders. These vampires are not just men or women. And I love hearing Lestat saying, yeah, I sometimes also wish being a woman, because that's pretty accurate to how he is in the books. Another interesting element in this episode is that when Lestat is about to die and he's looking up at the ceiling and he sees this light that is meant to represent the afterlife or something, he mentions these silver threads. And it's interesting because the vampires in the books at least are connected to this like huge spider web that is made of thousands and thousands of threads that are connected to the core, which is a male, and a male resides first in Akasha. And these threads are described as silvery in the books. So I wonder if Lestat is actually seeing like the vampire connection before dying. It is an interesting fact that I hope they explore in the following season. So we're finally in the finale of the finale, and Lestat awakens on his tour bus. And I'm concerned because Lestat says that he finds everything that happened thanks to Raglan James, which at the time he didn't know, but now he calls his friend. Lestat and Raglan James were never friends. Lestat never really liked Raglan James. You know who Lestat did like and love and call his friend and even lover? David Talbot. But they erased David Talbot because Louis and Daniel supposedly are going to fill his role in the show. But now I'm concerned that they're going to give David's relationship and friendship with Lestat to Raglan fucking James. Who cares about Raglan James? He's so unimportant in the books. I mean, he's the main villain of the Tale of the Body Thief, of course. But after that, he's just gone. No one cared about him, and I wouldn't like if they give that important part of David to Raglan. I mean, yeah, some part of the fandom doesn't like David, but does the fandom love Raglan James? Nobody cares about him. So yeah, I hope that doesn't go to where I think it's going. I did like that Raglan James brought up the theme of the soul and the body. Like the first title that Anne Rice was going to put to the Tale of the Body Thief was Body and Soul, because that book is all about how the body and soul are connected, but they can also be disconnected. So I liked seeing Raglan bringing up the soul to Daniel, which, by the way, Daniel threatened Raglan James with his fangs, but did Daniel attack Raglan? Because in the end, we see Raglan harmless, like he doesn't seem hurt or anything. So I don't know, did Daniel hurt him? And regarding Daniel, even though we got this fucked up closure for Armand and Louis, we don't really get an ending for Armand and Daniel. Like, we know where Lestat is when he awakes on his turbos. There is Louis, there is Gabriella, there is Alex, Tofkoki, and Salamander, but where the hell are Armand and Daniel? And why didn't we have some sort of resolution for them? Again, more questions than answers. Speaking of Alex, the way he's like non-verbal reminds me a lot of Nicky when he was first transformed. He wasn't able to speak or to form coherent thoughts because he wasn't taken well into vampirism. So I don't know where they're going with Alex. He's weird. Was he able to walk under the sun? Because how else did he arrive to the bowling thing with Daniel? It was daytime, so is he able to walk under the sun as well? I loved seeing Lestat finally telling Gabriella to fuck off. It wasn't enough, and I know we are going to get more about their dynamic in the next season, and I think we're going to explore how Lestat is finally able to break apart from his groomer and abuser. But it was satisfying seeing Lestat finally telling Gabriella that she's an actual monster, and this is all thanks to the journey he went through while his head was detached from his body. And yeah, I mean, since this Gabriella is not Gabrielle from the books anymore, I don't care. I really want her gone. Oh my god, I don't want anything else from her. Which, by the way, I think they are creating like this rivalry between Gabriella and Akasha for season 4, because Gabriella is like this big agent and promoter of the Great Conversion, which is, you know, creating more vampires than humans, so vampires can dominate the world. And this is the opposite of Akasha's goal. Akasha wants to eradicate the majority of the vampire race, so her power can be more condensed. So Gabriella and Akasha are going to be on opposite ends, and now Lestat is going against Gabriella, so he might join Akasha more willfully than he did in the books, even though then he's going to realize that Akasha is no better than Gabriella. But yeah, I'm interested in all of this is going, because apparently the Talamasca is also planning the Great Conversion. So is Gabriella working with and for the Talamasca? More questions than answers. The final reunion between Louis and Lestat is perfect. Like, they were able to continue their beautiful loving stares at each other like they were at the park so perfectly. And I did wish there was like a kiss from them, because, you know, we didn't get much queer kisses this season. But yeah, it was wholesome, it was beautiful, and I know we have a beautiful Lestat future for us. And I hope it's the same for Devil's Minions, because in this season we didn't see anything from Devil's Minions. I mean, technically everything that happened between them happened off screen, so I hope we get to see more of those minions in the future. For the things Lestat said in his narration, we know the concert happened, and I think I hope we're going to see that concert in the next season. But how did it happen? Because Lestat told Gabriela that he was not going to do that. So what pushed Lestat to do it? Maybe Louis did it, or maybe the concert was rescheduled for another day. More questions than answers. And the season wraps up by showing us Lestat recording the Failure albums, which, by the way, I don't think this narration is finished. Lestat is like taking a pause, but Lestat still has a lot to say, so I think we're going to continue with, you're listening to the Failures album 60, side A, I guess. But yeah, we finish in this post-Akasha, post-apocalyptic world, and Lestat looks more statuesque. He looks more ethereal. He's not blinking. He's able to walk in the sun. So he has like the power up Akasha gives to him after giving so much of her blood to him. So I'm guessing that at this point of the story, which is, it has to be before the auction, because Lestat is recording the albums that are being held in the auction. I guess at this point of the story, Akasha and the twins as well must be there already, because Amel is already in Lestat's body. Lestat speaks as Amel in the first person in the 5th episode, and Lestat looks almost like a statue. So I think Amel is already inside of him, and he has this huge amount of power that allows him to just walk into daylight, which I wonder how Armand is able to do that without the blood of Akasha, and without Amel, and how is Daniel able to do that if it's just like a newborn fledgling. My theory is that maybe this is some sort of trick Marius learned from Akasha, and then Marius taught that trick to Armand, and then Armand taught that trick to Daniel. But I hope it makes sense, because right now it doesn't make sense that Lestat is able to walk in the sun after everything he went with Akasha, but Armand and Daniel are able to do that without any power-ups. So yeah, this is the end of the season. Don't worry, you aren't seeing the last of me. I still have a lot to say about this season and this universe, so you will see me again in future videos. But yeah, was this a good finale book adaptation? No. It was not what any of us were expecting, and it was not what we were promised with all of those photos of Rolling Jones holding the Vampire Lestat as if it was the Bible. Nothing to do with that. Very performative. But it was a good ending for the story they told this season, even with the weak writing we had in this season. But I liked it, I enjoyed it, and I can't wait to see more of this story, hopefully sooner than later. So, see you guys.